because the dynamic. There's a kind of message that doesn't beg to be answered, doesn't scream for attention, and doesn't collapse into sorrow, doesn't ask for love. It doesn't chase it either. But it lands like thunder inside the heart of someone who has spent their whole life running from closeness. It breaks through what even years of silence couldn't touch. Not because it's loud, but because it's real. And it's that reality, calm, unshaking, rooted that they cannot forget. Avoidants aren't strangers to people walking away. They're used to being left behind or doing the leaving first. They're familiar with pain, with detachment, with the ache of distance disguised as control. They've built their lives around not needing anyone because needing has always meant danger. So when someone sees through that armor and still chooses to stay, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, consciously, it disrupts everything they've come to believe about safety. And yet, it's not the staying that echoes the loudest in their soul. It's what happens after, when the love remains but the toleration ends. When the door is left open not as an invitation, but as a boundary. When the message comes not with venom or blame, but with deep clarity, I saw you, I stayed, but I won't shrink for you to feel safe. That sentence isn't just words. It's a revelation. It carries the full weight of presence without self-abandonment. It doesn't plead. It doesn't punish. It declares. And it does what nothing else could. It speaks in a language they never learned but always needed to hear. Because for someone who has armored themselves against love, this message becomes a paradox they can't resolve. How can someone see every flaw, every fear, every crack in their mask and still choose them? But more importantly, how can someone choose them and still choose themselves? That contradiction lives in the soul of that message. It's why it doesn't leave. It's why it settles into the quiet spaces where their thoughts wander when the world is still. It becomes the one voice that doesn't beg to be understood, yet remains impossible to ignore. The truth is, people rarely speak to avoidance in this way. Most either tiptoe around their fear, trying not to trigger their retreat, or they push too hard and demand change. But this message, it does neither. It meets them where they are, but refuses to lose itself in the process. It says, I understand your wounds, but I won't let them bury me. It offers compassion without codependence, love without martyrdom. And that is unforgettable because the avoidant mindset is built on one core belief, that love means loss of self. So when someone shows up, fully present and unshaken, and then walks away not in pain, but in power, it reprograms everything. That message becomes a mirror, and in that reflection, they see something they don't want to face, that the connection wasn't broken by chaos or cruelty or betrayal. It was broken by their fear, by their own refusal to receive what they silently begged for. They may not respond. They may pretend they didn't hear it. They may delete the message, block the number, bury the memory, but it will remain because truth isn't erased by silence. It's magnified by it. And that one message delivered without drama, without demand, without diminishing its own worth, will continue to pulse inside them, not as punishment, not as guilt, but as the first real encounter with love that didn't collapse under pressure. It's not a message for them to react to. It's a message they are meant to carry. A reminder that someone once held them without losing themselves. And whether they admit it or not, that kind of presence leaves a mark deeper than any scream or goodbye ever could. They will never forget it. Avoidants often get misunderstood. From the outside, it looks like indifference, a cold shoulder, a disappearing act, a refusal to engage. But beneath that surface lies a complexity that even they don't fully understand. It's not a lack of feeling. It's the overwhelming presence of it. The depth they carry is not empty. It's overflowing. But they've never had the tools to navigate that current. So they shut it down before it floods everything. They weren't born this way. They became this way. Over time, through experience, through subtle wounds repeated until they became beliefs. Somewhere along the line, closeness became a threat. Love became dangerous. Vulnerability turned into something to fear, not embrace. And so they adapted by disconnecting, by finding safety in space, by making sure that no one ever got close enough to undo them again. And still, despite all that distance, they want love. They crave it. Not loudly, not in words, but in the quietest parts of themselves. They ache for it in moments they won't let anyone see. But that ache terrifies them more than it moves them, because to allow love means surrendering control. And for someone who has survived by maintaining distance, surrender feels like extinction. This is why that message lands so deeply. Not because it tries to tear down their walls, but because it never asked for entry. It simply stood there, whole, offering love without asking to be broken in the process. It didn't demand access. It offered truth. And that kind of truth isn't something they can dismiss. They're used to people leaving. But most people leave either with chaos or quiet resentment. This is different. This message doesn't storm out. It walks away with grace and clarity. And that clarity is what shakes them, because they know deep down that it came after being fully seen. Not just the good parts, not just the charming mask or the moments of connection, but all of the withdrawal, the defensiveness, the ways they push away and then look back, hoping no one saw. And someone did see. Someone stayed long enough to witness the fear behind the distance, the sadness beneath the silence. Someone touched the parts of them they've spent a lifetime protecting. And that someone didn't flinch, didn't beg, didn't lose themselves trying to be enough. That alone begins to unravel the tightly woven narrative they hold about intimacy, because they've told themselves over and over again, if someone truly sees me, they'll leave. If I let them in, I'll lose myself. If I love, I'll get hurt. But this message speaks another truth entirely. I saw it all. I stayed. But I will not disappear inside of your fear. And that is what haunts them, not because it causes pain, but because it reveals possibility. The possibility that someone could have walked with them if they had only let go. The possibility that they aren't as alone or unreachable as they've believed. The possibility that love doesn't have to mean suffocation, but it could have meant liberation. But they weren't ready. Maybe they still aren't. And that's the part they'll never say out loud. They'll call it timing. They'll say it wasn't right, but deep down they'll know it wasn't about the circumstances. It was about capacity. And when someone steps away after offering their presence so fully, it brings that capacity or lack of an undeniable light. This is why they carry the message, not because it broke them, but because it revealed them. It peeled back their illusion and showed them what could have been had they dared to feel. It met them in the one place they thought they could never be touched, their own truth. And for people who spend their lives running from themselves, that kind of mirror is unforgettable. There are moments in life that don't need explanation. They linger without noise, burn without flame, and echo without a sound. That message, the one that says, I saw you, I stayed, but I won't shrink for you to feel safe, is exactly that. It's not remembered because it was shouted. It's remembered because it didn't need to be, because it did what no begging, no long speeches, no tearful goodbyes ever could. It left them face to face with something avoidants have been able to escape their entire lives. Accountability without punishment, love without submission, truth without compromise, and it doesn't disappear. Most people chase love or destroy themselves trying to hold on to it. But this message doesn't do that. It doesn't chase. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't dramatize. It just is. And in its stillness, it becomes undeniable. It becomes the contrast they never expected. It shows them that someone can care deeply and still choose themselves. That someone can offer connection and not collapse when it isn't received. That memory becomes sharper over time, not duller. It becomes the standard by which they silently compare everything else. Because after all the defense mechanisms fade after the immediate distractions wear off, there's something irreplaceable about a moment when they were fully seen and still respected. And that is not something they encounter often. Most people either try to fix them, chase them, or leave in fury. But this was different. This was surgical, silent, strong, and real. It dismantles the fantasy that love only comes in chaos or control. That connection only exists in extremes, total enmeshment or complete abandonment. This message stands in the space between balanced and unwavering. And that kind of balance is alien to someone who has lived in emotional extremes. They don't know what to do with it, so they remember it. They remember the way it didn't accuse them, how it didn't point fingers, didn't fall apart, didn't ask for closure. It simply offered a truth so rooted in self-awareness that it became unshakable. And avoidants remember strength, real strength, not the loud kind, the kind that doesn't ask for permission to walk away. That's what stays with them. Because even if they never admit it, they know when they've been met with authenticity. They may minimize it, they may try to forget it, but something inside of them, the part that's buried under the fear, the silence, the stories they tell themselves, it knows the difference. It knows when someone showed up and stood still in the fire, refusing to burn for them. And it knows when that person left, not because they didn't care, but because they finally started caring for themselves. The power of that moment isn't in what was said. It's in what was shown. The avoidant may have expected anger, maybe guilt, maybe another round of emotional tug of war. But instead they received peace, a message delivered with such clarity that it dismantled the chaos they were used to controlling, a calm that felt foreign. And in that foreignness, unforgettable, they might try to replicate that connection later with someone new. They might search for the comfort of distance or the illusion of control again. But deep in their private reflections, that message lives. It comes back in the quiet. It comes back in the moments when someone else's presence doesn't feel the same, when something is missing and they don't know why. And then they remember. They remember the weight of being seen in the silence of being let go, all without blame, because that's the paradox they'll carry. They didn't lose someone who demanded too much. They lost someone who demanded nothing, except the right to remain whole. And that loss will always feel different, heavier, deeper, not because of regret alone, but because it was the first time they were truly offered love, not as possession, not as sacrifice, but as truth. And no matter how far they run, that kind of truth doesn't let go. There's a quiet revolution that happens when a boundary is drawn from self-respect, not from anger. It doesn't shake the ground. It doesn't announce itself with fury or finality, but it creates a shift so profound that the impact outlasts any explosive confrontation. For the avoidant, the shift is especially disarming because they expect ultimatums, not integrity. They're conditioned to brace for emotional manipulation or emotional collapse. But what they receive instead is something far more powerful, a message rooted in inner clarity, not control. That's what separates a true boundary from a desperate cry. A boundary doesn't ask the other person to change. It declares what will no longer be accepted, not as punishment, but as protection. And when it's delivered with love instead of resentment, it becomes one of the most transformative forces a human being can experience. The avoidant mind isn't unfamiliar with distance. In fact, it thrives on it. Distance is their way of maintaining safety. So when someone pulls away, it's often interpreted as just another step in a predictable pattern. But when that distance comes after presence, after staying, after seeing, after holding space, and is then paired with a clear boundary, everything changes. It forces a confrontation not with the other person, but with the self. And that's the confrontation they've been avoiding all along. They didn't expect that. They expected chaos, begging, bargaining, or withdrawal laced with emotional pain, but what they got was someone standing in their truth, unwavering, unbroken, and unbothered by their retreat. Someone who didn't collapse into grief. Someone who didn't chase. Someone who didn't make it about rejection or revenge. Instead, the message was crystal clear. I saw what you were carrying. I stayed with you in it. But I will not abandon myself in the process. And that kind of clarity is unforgettable. It's not meant to wound. It's meant to awaken. It's not a wall meant to shut them out. It's a doorway. A path they can choose or not. But for once, the choice is no longer tangled in guilt or pressure. The person on the other side has already made peace with their decision. They've walked away, not as an act of war, but as an act of self-honoring. That's what a true boundary does. It doesn't scream, choose me. It whispers, I've already chosen me. And that's what lingers in the heart of the avoidant. Not the rejection, not the loss, but the tone of the departure. It wasn't reactive. It wasn't dramatic. It was final because there's nothing left to prove, nothing left to fight for, because the battle had never been about being loved. It had always been about being respected. And now, finally, that respect had been turned inward. Boundaries are often misunderstood as threats, but threats are built on fear. Boundaries are built on truth. They don't push people away. They invite alignment. They say, if you want to meet me, come with clarity, not confusion. Come with courage, not escape routes. I won't wait in your emotional fog. And for someone who thrives in ambiguity, someone who keeps others dangling in half, commitments and emotional contradictions, this message is a lighthouse, a flare that cuts through the storm they've created. It's the first time someone stepped out of their chaos and into their own light and didn't look back. That moment stays with them. Because it's not about blame. It's about standard. It's not about saying you're not enough. It's about saying I will no longer make myself less to be enough for you. And that distinction changes everything. No threat, no demand. Just truth. And truth doesn't chase. It doesn't convince. It doesn't control. It stands. And long after the conversation ends, long after they return to their silence or their distractions, that truth remains echoing like a bell they can't unring. Because it wasn't said to change them. It was said to free you. And in that freedom, they are left with the clearest reflection they've ever seen. Someone who loved them, but not more than they loved themselves. They'll act like it didn't matter. Like the message was just another moment in a long list of passing interactions. Like it was too little too late, or nothing at all. They'll brush it off with a shrug, or worse, complete silence. And that silence will be the trap. Because the instinct will be to assume they didn't care. But they did, and they do. Avoidants are masters of emotional disguise. They've trained themselves to look calm when they're drowning, distant when they're overwhelmed, and detached when they're breaking inside. So when the message comes, the one that doesn't beg, doesn't blame, and doesn't bend, they do exactly what they've always done. They pretend. They minimize, they numb. But the truth is, the more indifferent they appear, the deeper the wound. The colder the response, the more it shook them. Because that message didn't ask for anything. And when someone is used to people pleading for their attention, the quiet strength of detachment becomes a mirror too honest to bear. They can ignore it, but they can't escape it. Because avoidance isn't a lack of emotion. It's an overload of it. Feelings buried alive, emotions locked in vaults so tight, even they can't access them until it's too late. They don't detach because they don't feel. They detach because they don't know how to stay present in the storm of what they feel. And that message, spoken with dignity and clarity, brings the storm right to the surface. It doesn't attack, it doesn't shame. It simply exists like a truth too grounded to be erased. And so it stays. Not on their phone, not on the screen, but in their mind, in their memory, in the places they go when they're finally alone and the silence isn't peaceful anymore. They may never say it out loud, they may never respond, but that message becomes a reference point. A before and after. Before it, they were still convincing themselves they were in control, that their distance was working, that nobody could really reach them. After it, they know better, because someone did, and that someone didn't scream or chase or fight. That someone stepped back, not to abandon them, but to reclaim themselves. And there is no defense against that kind of grace. They may look unaffected, move on quickly, even appear happier. But no replacement, no distraction, no casual encounter can silence the part of them that remembers what it felt like to be seen, truly seen, and still held with such calm strength. The myth of indifference is how they survive, because how they convince themselves that their choices didn't come with consequences, that nothing was really lost, that they're better off alone. But over time, that myth begins to break, not because anyone forces it, but because truth doesn't expire. And the truth of that message, its calm, its courage, its completeness, becomes louder in every empty connection that follows, because nothing else feels quite like that. Nothing else reflects them back with that level of honesty. Nothing else offers love that doesn't demand submission. So they may pretend, they may replace, but deep down, They know they won't find it again in someone who tiptoes around their fear or enables their detachment. That message was the moment someone stopped choosing them over themselves. And the heart, even one wrapped in layers of fear, knows when it's witnessed something rare, something real. And real is what they run from, but also what they long for. So they'll carry it not openly, not with words, but in the way they struggle to connect again, in the way they remember the stillness, the dignity, the absence of desperation. It becomes a standard they don't talk about but always compare to. A silent benchmark of what they lost, not because it left them, but because they never let it in. And no matter what story they tell the world, one truth will follow them everywhere. That message didn't fade. It grew. Send it, not to win them back, not to provoke guilt, not to make them see what they refuse to face. Send it because the cycle ends here. Send it because the part of you that used to wait, to bend, to twist into shapes that fit inside someone else's fear has finally remembered what it means to stand. This is not a plea. This is a line in the sand, a return to wholeness, a reclaiming of your voice. And that message, simple, clear, and utterly unshakable, is not just for them. It's a message for your own soul, a declaration that you are done contorting yourself in the name of connection. You are done mistaking emotional starvation for love. You are done giving oxygen to someone else's silence. Because here's the truth, you were never too much. You were never asking for the impossible. All you ever wanted was presence, honesty, a heart willing to meet yours halfway. But you waited too long in the space where someone else refused to arrive. You stayed too long in the rooms where your name was never spoken with care. And now, finally, you're stepping out, not in pain, but in power. Send it not to make noise, but to make peace. Because silence can feel like surrender. But this kind of silence, the one that follows your message, is sacred. It's not empty. It's full of your decision, your boundary, your self-respect. It doesn't ask, will they reply? It declares, I've already closed this door in my spirit. Let it be known you are no longer performing for their attention. You are no longer holding up a mirror in hopes they will see themselves. You are no longer begging someone who fears their own depth to meet you in yours. That's not love. That's captivity. And the key was always in your hands. You do not need a dramatic ending to mark your liberation. You need a quiet return to self. You need that one message, the one that says, I saw you, I stayed, but I won't shrink for you to feel safe. You need that message not because it will change them, but because it already changes you. It frees you. And it invites them, if they ever dare, to do the same. If they evolve, if they awaken, if one day they find the courage to meet love without running from it, that's theirs to carry. But you don't wait for that. You walk now, you choose now, you rise now. This is the moment you stop making yourself the echo of someone else's avoidance. This is the moment you become the origin of your own truth. Let the message speak. Let it carry what can no longer live inside you. Let it release the hope that someone else's transformation is your responsibility. Let it burn away the illusion that love must cost you your self-worth. And if it stays with them forever, let it. Let it be the moment they remember, not because it broke them, but because it finally revealed them. Let it haunt them in their silence, not as punishment, but as proof that someone once loved them, fully and left without losing themselves. And let you walk forward from this moment knowing one thing without doubt, you never needed their response. You only needed your voice. So send it, not for them, for you.